Wright Flood is the #1 writer of flood insurance in the 4 largest flood states. That's Florida, Louisiana, Texas, and California. And we're #2 now in New Jersey and New York and gaining market share. And we think it's because of our dedication to the flood product and flood claims. You may have known that during Sandy, our claims closure rate was twice as fast as all of our competitors. Why does that matter to you? Well, that means your clients are more likely to be happy, or at least less dissatisfied, when their flood claim is handled faster and with less contention. And as a result, more and more brokers are doing business with us on flood, and we thank you for that. So today, Dwayne is going to talk about the Biggert Waters Act, which is a significant development in flood insurance. And it's had a lot of press lately. The Today Show had an expose on it a couple of weeks ago. I believe we're getting 1,500 calls a day to our St. Petersburg headquarters of flood with questions about Biggert Waters. So I'm sure you have questions about Biggert Waters, and Dwayne, who has spent more than 30 years in the business dedicated to flood insurance, knows the topic inside and out. He's ready to get deep if you want to get deep, so he will answer any questions that you have. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dwayne and ask him to come up here.
Thanks, Phil.
Oh, a couple of housekeeping items. Sorry. We are videotaping this session, and it will be on our website. So if you want to go back and view it again, or more importantly, let your colleagues in your offices know about it, or your clients know about it, it will be on our website. In addition, we have handouts related to what Dwayne's going to say. And we can send to you his PowerPoint presentation electronically if you just let us know after the session. So, without further ado, Dwayne.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Just in case you don't recognize the accents, I'm from the New Orleans area. I live in Covington, Louisiana. I'm a Who Dat fan. For you people who don't understand who that is, I'm a big Saints fan. And right now, it's a good time to be a Saints fan. 3-0, right? So unlike one of my other favorite teams, who's 0-3, you know, it's a shame, you know. But I am a big New York Giants fan. Became a New York Giants fan when a guy out of Tulane University came up here to play running back. And for you people who are old enough to know, the gentleman was number 28, and he was Bobby Duhon, and he played running back for the New York Giants. So that's when I first started really paying attention to the Giants at that point. It wasn't the Y.A. Tittle days. I'm not that old. Okay. But anyway, we're going to talk about the Biggert Waters Reform Act of 2012, and that's where we're going to spend most of my time. But I'd like to get a little bit of an idea. I've been working Sandy basically ever since it hit. I was helping out. I was asked to help out because of my experience over the years, but more importantly, my experience post-Katrina. And that's where my biggest experience has been in this. To give you an idea, we ended up with about 27,000 plus claims as Wright Flood as a result of Sandy. Give you the other side of it. For Katrina, we had over 65,000 claims, okay? So it gives you a big perspective of it. So one of the reasons we brought in was for the expertise of that, and then the fact of working not only during the catastrophe, after it was, just post-catastrophe, when claims were being handled, but as you exit from the catastrophe, there is a whole new world that just came in front of you. You know, and that's kind of where I spend a lot of my time when I'm talking business development. You know, on the commercial side, where all of a sudden people are realizing the exposure, the timing of payments, and all those different things that the flood risk really brings to the forefront. So that's where I spend a lot of my time. I spend it whether it be working with condominium associations, whether it be working with municipal governments, large property management groups, that type of thing, and having them get their arms around the risk of flood and what it really means. And that changes once a storm hits. Example being, if you're under the food program right now, my understanding is that you used to have a policy on the property side that was more all-inclusive zone-wise on flood. But my understanding on your most recent renewal, it's only unshaded X zones that are now included in that property coverage. If you're dealing with NYMER, then you've got, various different, you have a sub-limit, and you have two different sub-limits and two different deductibles if you're talking about the peril of flood. So it becomes all of a sudden something that was not on the forefront is now right out in front of you because of the reality of what happened in Sandy. So we can help from that standpoint of understanding it, because I sell flood from knowledge standpoint and understanding the risk of flood. I'm working on a case right now. I met with the risk manager on September the 9th, and I asked him point blank. He had no flood insurance. In fact, his entire plant was put down as a result of Sandy, and he had absolutely no flood. Now, he's a nonprofit, so he qualifies under the Stafford Act for public assistance. And as a result of the public assistance, what he's now relying on the federal government on a cost share of 75 cents on the dollar to help recover that nonprofit organization to where it is. At this point in time, on September 9th, I said, how much public assistance dollars have you received? And he said 0 to date. And that's what he's relying on to make him whole. We looked at it, and he had, because he was in a hazardous zone under public assistance, an obtain and maintain. And his obtain and maintain said, if you're in a hazardous zone prior to an event, and then later on an event happens and you require public assistance, we will reduce what assistance we provide you by what you could have bought from the federal government. Had he bought from the federal government under the federal program, he would have had $25 million in coverage. Now, I will just use our own statistics. Of course, claims cycle starts out and you're aggressively closing more and more, and it's a fast percentage, and ultimately you come to almost what you call a screeching halt, and it seems like it endures a life of its own. Well, right now we're 99% closed on our claims. We've got supplements, we've got the headache claims, that 1% is the hardest part to close out of everything that's there. Okay? So if I take the math of us, and if he would have had 25 million, in his pocket would have been 99%, right, of 25 million. Instead of having that now, he has that as a reduction in benefit, and as well as he's going to have to insure going forward. And he has to now insure to the full assistance that was given to him, which in this case is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $123 million. Okay? So I just want you to understand, it's not, when you look at the risk of flood, it's not just what is it going to pay, what is it going to do, it's also what is the timing of those dollars, how can they be used, what can be managed even in the way the program allows you to write policies. You have several buildings and you have additions and extensions. Can I include them as one? Can I separate them to get higher limits? Rating purposes could make a difference. The way you treat something rating-wise could make a difference in what the actual ultimate cost is. Bottom line to a risk manager is, what is my cost and what is my benefit? And had he had $25 million in his hand today, he would, instead of being $8 million out of pocket to get the place back open and at least get some revenue coming in, he'd be in a much better place than where he is and actually have more of his facilities open than what he had. Actually, the risk I'm talking about is the New York Aquarium. It's a very visible risk, and Mayor Bloomberg has been very high on, I want to get this open. This is one of my last biggest projects, and it opened up in May, but in a very small piece of it. That's their fate of it, and that's what that risk manager is now faced with. So those are the kind of things we'd like to, instead of being in this position where we're assisting the aquarium post-event, we would like to be in the position where we're assisting you to help outline that risk. Whether they buy or not, at least they understand their risk and they understand the impact of it. And then when it happens, they have the expectation of what to expect as opposed to the total unknown of which most of these entities go through. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and that's one of the things. What I'd like to hear right now, and if you don't mind responding to me, is what are the issues that you have right now coming out of Sandy and that you're foreseeing in the very near future, okay, of Sandy, and then also what are some of the issues you may think that you think that this Biggert Waters Act is going to do as well to complicate that, therefore I can get an idea of the perception. I have a pretty good, because I've met with a lot of the people in this room. So if anybody would help me out and just kind of say, what are some of the issues you're dealing with right now as you're coming out of Sandy? And then, I can maybe incorporate some of that in. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Mapping and remapping of zones.
Okay, the mapping issues and remapping of zones. In New York, it's basically New York and vicinity and some of the counties out of it.
New Jersey.
New Jersey as well? Okay, okay. I'm just making sure I know my target area. Anything else besides mapping? Yes?
Elevation certificates.
Elevation certificates. That's going to be a bear. And this law is part of why it's going to be a bear. And we'll talk a little there then. Okay, yes?
I was going to say the cost of the flood insurance with the elevation certificate.
The quotes of that flood insurance, quotes of the flood insurance and the elevation certificate, so we'll get into a little bit of that. Anything else? No problems with ICC? Understanding that? Yes?
Any chance that the flood policy would ever be expanded to do replacement cost coverage and give some kind of business interruption coverage?
Okay. I'll answer that one right now.
No.
Okay. At this point in time, the program's $26 billion in debt when we're all finished with Sandy, and now from when the original 250 and 100 or 500 and 500 was, and in the last Reform Act, which was passed with this bill, Biggert Waters Reform Act of 2012, there was nothing put into that bill. Stuff was tried to put in, and it immediately got shot down by both houses. Okay? Anything else? Okay, good. Let's go into, I'm going to go into Biggert Waters, and what I want to clarify, wait a minute, it says up, down. That's why he couldn't do it. He was pressing up and it was going down. Is down my slides, I guess. Okay, we're going to talk about Biggert Waters Act. Now understand this. The one thing I want you to understand is this is what we know as I sit here today. This is a congressional program. This is something that can be changed by the passage of another law and then signing in by the president. At this point in time, you've got delays being put in front of the Congress, and those delays have not yet made it all the way through both chambers and to the president for a signature, okay? Contrary to what some people believe, say, well, wait a minute, the House approved the delay, the Senate's Appropriation Committee, well, guess what? It hasn't gone through the full process. I like to use, my daughter's 32 years old, and I watched her grow up, listening to this little cartoon that says if I was a bill on Capitol Hill, and it told you the whole process of how it became a law. And his dream was to become a law. And the laborious process it is. We're still a bill on Capitol Hill. And nothing has gotten through those chambers to delay this thing. So at this point and even by FEMA Director Craig Fugate, he sat in front of the Senate Appropriations Committee and says, my hands are tied. I've talked to our attorneys and our counsels and said we must implement this bill. We cannot delay it on our own. I need assistance from you, gentlemen and ladies. And he was talking to the Senate Appropriations Committee. So that's what's going on in the chambers at this point in time. So what we're talking about is what we know today. This thing could change. I would tell you that you have to stay tuned because it could change everything. Of course, we will inform as soon as we know anything that's going to impact the way we do business. But that's the one thing I want to clarify. So if something I say today and 2 weeks from now, it's totally different, don't blame the guy that brought the message because that message got changed. It's out of my hands. Okay? The biggest problem with this that is being faced is affordability, is what's being pushed to people up in Congress, and the question that they're answering is, okay, should we delay this bill because of affordability and do affordability studies? And People say, why was it passed in the first place without all that? This was attached to the Water Resource Act, and those, quite frankly, were much bigger budget items and stuff that was necessary, and to kill this would kill that bill. So as a result it got passed without any real hearings on the floor. There were some objections on the floor as to the impact of it. However, it was passed as a part of another law, okay? So I just want you to understand some of it. And it's kind of like, we make decisions in our own lives where we know that there's a possibility that this can happen, but yet the overall decision is to go ahead and go with this, and hopefully we can adjust for this later on. We do that in our own personal lives, and our Congress does that as well. And so in my opinion, that's really where this type of thing came into play without it. And the big piece of this was 5-year reauthorization. That's, okay, is this thing going to get me where I want to go? This 5-year reauthorization. The Biggert Waters Act's primary thing that it did was it took the flood program and reauthorized it for 5 years to get us all the way till September of 2017. The other portion of this particular bill was the fact of significant reforms in the program. Technically, the intent of the law is to move the flood program away from the government and towards privatization. That is the long-term intent of the law. Okay? In order to do that, it has to be something that is not subsidized anymore. Because private industry can't compete with a subsidized program. There's parts of this program which are subsidized anywhere from 40 to 70%. So when I'm looking at it as a private company, I can't compete when you're giving $7 out of 10 on that premium and the insured's only paying $3 out of 10. So what the reform is doing is pulling all the subsidies technically out of the program and moving it to actuarial full rate. Okay? That's the design of the law, is to privatize and remove the subsidies out of it. And Biggert Waters started that. It was the one key date on this slide you got to remember is July 6, 2012. That's when it was penned by the president, and that's when it was enacted. Now we're going through implementation. The real world is, okay, you pen it and then you're going to implement it as later. But technically the law is written that if it's enacted July 6, it should be implemented on July 6, 2012. Well, this thing has implementation dates going well at this point to all the way, as far as we know, sometime the latter part of 2014. So I want you to remember July 6, 2012. It's a very key date because it does make a difference in how you react to different provisions in this law. These are just some of the implementation dates. I don't like section numbers when I'm talking to brokers. I like to go in dates. So as you can see, my key dates here is July 6, 2012. My next key date is January 1, 2013. My next key date is October 1, 2013. And then I have a latter date, sometime late 2014, another date. Okay? Those are my key dates. So we said July 6, January 1, October 1, and then sometime the latter part of 2014. And there may even be some things even later than that. But at least at this point, those are our key dates. The various different sections, they're referenced here, and it's affected at. I want to talk about the program and say, what is the federal subsidy? So we said we're taking the subsidy out of the program, okay? If I take the subsidy out of the program, well, what's being subsidized, okay? You need to understand is there's basically, as we offer in federal flood insurance, there's basically 3 subsidies. One is your pre-firm subsidy. And I'm going to define pre-firm. If the building was built prior to January 1st, 1975, or if the community entered in the program after January 1st, 75, it's going to be the date the community entered the program, anything before it. So if I entered the program in January 1980, then pre-firm for that community is prior to January 1980. Most communities, we're seeing the program, it's January 1, anything before that. So when I look at, like my own hometown in New Orleans, or as I go around New York, we've got a lot of buildings that were built before 1974. So a lot of impact in this area that is there. That subsidy right now is about 40 to 70% of premium. Okay? So people say, hey, 40, so if I'm paying that, if I'm paying $100 in premium, my premium's $100, and the government's either giving an additional $4 or additional $7 on it. I'm either paying maybe 30% or I'm paying 60% on the dollar, or somewhere's in between there. It varies by rate and classification. But that's the real subsidy. People say, well, what is the real actuarial premium? My rule of thumb is if the subsidy is between 40 and 70%, you can almost double your premium, and that's your real premium. Okay? Now, that's one part of the subsidy, is the pre-firm subsidy. Okay? And it's only on pre-firm special flood hazard areas. I'm going to define special flood hazard. Basically, those buildings that are in zones that begin with the letter A as in apple or V as in Victor. Okay? And zone D as in Dwayne. Okay? So, what I want you to understand is that's where the subsidy is. Pre-firm, built before 74 or before the community entered the program, and it was in a hazardous area. So what I just said is if it was pre-firm and it was in a B, C, or X zone, meaning one of the non-hazardous zones, then I'm telling you that's the full actuarial rate. Okay? The second form of subsidy is primarily can be on pre-firm buildings and post-firm buildings, and the term we all use in the industry is grandfathering. My building was built usually post-firm, so it was built, let's say, the firm date is 12/31/74, so I was built in January of 1980. I was built in an AE zone, meaning I had a base flood elevation, so I had to build to a certain height. That certain height's a 1% chance of flooding in any given year, or base flood elevation. And if I built to that height, then basically I'm paying a premium based on the difference between my building and that. Since it's zero, that's why my rate's driven. So I was regulated to that height, and at this point in time, 1980s when I built, 2009 I went through a map change. When I went through a map change in 2009, instead of a base flood of 10, they raised my base flood to 14. Well, at this point in time, under the current law that's being enforced is, technically, I can keep my existing AE 10 with a zero difference, rather than the higher base flood elevation of 14, which would have me at a -4. Okay? So I am not paying the full actuarial rate based on the most recent map. So I'm being grandfathered to the old because I was built in compliance with the old map. And therefore that is a form of subsidy. If I'm not paying the full rate, somebody's subsidizing it, and it's the federal government in that case. By the same token, if I was pre-firm and I was built in a C zone and I bought my policy in 1978, and I've kept it continually renewed all the way till today, I'm still capturing that C even though my map may have moved me to an AE. I'm being grandfathered into that C even though my risk is a hazardous area. So that's another form of subsidy on the pre-firm side and post-firm is grandfathering. The third one is, and some communities have experienced this, some haven't. And the third one is what we call a preferred risk policy extension. If you're located in a B, C, or X zone and you have limited loss history, basically one loss or less is the easiest way for me to say that, then you could qualify for a reduced rate for it, and it has packaged limits like 250 and 100, or you can buy 500 and 500 if it's a commercial, or you can pick and choose certain limits, but you can't, like, say, you have a limited amount of choices. It's almost, on the personal line side, I call it's like buying a Happy Meal, because you get the whole thing or not, whether you need it or not. On the commercial side, at least you can pick, it tends at various different increments between up to 500,000 on building, 500,000 on contents at various $10,000 increments. That's in that chart. So, and it gives you a reduced rate. Well, if you went through a map change after 2008, if you went through a map change and you were moved from that a non-hazardous area to a hazardous area, the government said, we will allow you to keep your PRP for 2 years, and then you will be rated at the standard BC and X rate going forward, and allow it to be grandfathered. Well, the PRP extension is saying, well, wait a minute, your map has already changed to an AE, you're still paying this low reduced rate. That's a form of subsidy. That is called the PRP extension, which the PRP extension is a form of subsidy. Okay? Those are the three forms of subsidy. When I look at a post-firm building that's rated on an elevation certificate, so if you came into my office today and said, I need a policy on my commercial building, the strip shopping center, and I need a policy on it, and I look it up on the maps, and it's currently in an AE zone with a 15-foot base flood elevation, get the elevation certificate, and I base my rate on current map and current elevation certificate, that rate's actuarially sound. So your post-firm rates, unless it's grandfathered, okay, are going to be actuarially sound. So most of my talk today is going to be about that part which is subsidized, not subsidized. I'm not talking about BC and X zones, and I'm not talking about post-firm rated buildings based on the current map and elevations. Is everybody okay with that? Any questions or any point at this point? Yeah, Joe?
Hey, Dwayne. Maybe you're going to get into this, but how does a broker know if their client's policy is one that is subsidized?
How does a broker know whether or not? If it meets those categories I just defined is the only way I can.
No, is it on the policy?
It won't say it on the policy, no. For the most part, again, like I said, we're talking pre-firm risk, special flood hazard areas, and then anything that's grandfathered. Now, if it is grandfathered, it will show it on the declarations page. If it is a PRP extension, in most cases it doesn't show it on it, but the policy number we know is coded because we had to code the policy number to fall off. The PRP extension, remember I said, was for 2 years. As a result of the administration of this law, they extended it indefinitely. Well, indefinitely does have a grave time. I hate to say it. Their definition of indefinite and my definition of indefinite is wait a minute, it's going to go on forever is indefinitely to me. But this thing has a finite date in which it'll actually be gone as well. Okay? So to answer your question, there's no real way other than knowing that these are subject. Your insured doesn't know it until if we get into the renewal processes as these come on. Okay? And so they're relying on your notification or our notifications. But I just want to make key things. July 6, January 1, then we're talking October 1, 2013, and then we're talking sometime later 2014. Yeah, yes, sir.
We're going to have some type of advance notice when this PRP does have a type of grave ending?
When the PRP extension, the PRP is going to still be continued, but the extension piece where we've had a change in zone, at this point, and I'll get into it, it's scheduled to go when all the elimination of grandfather under Section 207, which is the very bottom one, okay?
2014.
Sometime latter part of 2014, at least at this point, okay? So, I mean, we'll go into that in a little more detail, but that's an easy way to do it. But I just want you to understand is, you know, hey, if you don't know what's subsidized, how you know what's happening? And that's why I wanted to take some time and cover that. Everybody's okay with what a pre-firm building is and what a post-firm building is. Post-in would be after those dates rather than before. It wasn't rocket science. For you who, like when I first came in this business, when they would say pre-firm, post-firm, and I said, what the hell does all this stuff mean? Understand the word firm means flood insurance rate map. And I went, oh wow, that's why they've been using that, okay? That was many years ago though. But basically, you know, it's technically saying pre is before that map was adapted and passed and made in ordinance and law by the city or the township or the county, whatever the political subdivision that regulate. And then anything before it is pre and anything after it is post. Makes it very easy. I also will tell you, I teach this from a regulatory standpoint. And if you can get your ears around this regulatory rise, you're sitting here saying anything before the ordinances were passed by the community, there was no regulation for flood. So everything we're talking about that's subsidized is unregulated property as it relates to flood. We have no clue if it's above the base flood, below the base flood. You know, they could have built over the ground, under the ground. It didn't matter because there was no floodplain management available or even being enforced in that community. Now, once they adopted the codes and ordinances and accepted the program on their firm date, which is when the government and them came together and said, you're going to enforce, and then we will provide an insurance, which is the date, like either 12/31/74, the entry of the program. From that point on, all your hazardous zones were regulated to what height they were built to. So anything that was built under a B, C, or X, they didn't care whether you put them under the ground, below the ground, or what. They were non-regulated. Anything that was in an A or a V, starting with an A or a V, they were regulated to what height they had to build. Okay? So that's why you'll see, you know, hey, there's more subsidy in the unknown than there is in the known. And the only subsidy in the known is what we talked about was grandfather. Okay? So if you understand it was not regulated, so when you ask me, you know, hey, I got a condominium, do you think it's going to be good? And I say, look, if it was built in the 1970s, I have no clue. Because they could have built it at any height they would have, and they would have built it to accommodate the basic, you know, what the building was designed to do. Example being, I looked at a condominium association here recently, okay, and they were complaining that the premium was somewhere along the neighborhood of $300,000 plus, okay, and we're talking $100 million worth of coverage, okay, or more. And they were complaining, and the broker had already recommended go get an elevation certificate. Well, when they got the elevation certificate, it did them absolutely no good because their $300,000 subsidized premium. Now, if I use the actuarial rate, which would be use the elevation certificate and compare it to the current map, would have been at a -17 below base flood elevation. Now, if you think that $300,000 is not affordable, wait till they get the bill for that -17 eventually. Okay, that's some of the reality of this law. And I want you to understand that that's you know, how do you manage that? How does an association that at this point in time in some of the boroughs and that I've been through is primarily an elderly retired population, doesn't have a lot of cash flow, going to absorb some of these premiums and that, okay? So it's a real dilemma on the affordability side, and you can understand why Senate and the House are starting to get a lot of pushback as some of these bills are coming out from the company. Yes, Joe?
How do people find out what the firm date is for their community?
Question is, how do people find out what the firm date is for their community? You can, the easiest way that I do is I literally go to FEMA.gov, go to the search engine, and I put in the words Community Status Booklet. And in that, you'll get like a Google search. The very first one that pops up, well, actually, if you click on that search engine, you'll find, it'll bring you to a page which has every state status book. That will tell you not only when the community was first initially come into the regular program, it'll also tell you when the initial map was established, it'll also tell you the current mapping establishment, okay? So that's the best resource I have. If you're working with a company, we're taking the file and downloading it from the federal government, and our system is smart enough to know what the firm date is. So that's why when you rate it on a system, you give us a date of construction or date of permit, okay? And then the system is just immediately looking at this table and saying, okay, is it pre or post? And it's asking questions accordingly, okay? So the necessity of it's not there, but I find it's always good to know exactly when it is and what is impacting this rate, you know, as a result of when it was built, was it regulated, was it not regulated, that type of thing, okay? Any other questions right now? Yes?
If you're grandfathered in, is it a finite period of time that you're grandfathered in?
At this point in time, until this law is enacted, you're grandfathered in on pre-firm as long as you continually renew. On post-firm, you're grandfathered in as long as you keep it in renewal or as long as it's in compliance. If you let it lapse, and it was in compliance when it was originally built, we can still bring it back to that grandfather. Okay? Yes, sir.
this isn't a trick question, but I can't get the true answer. When NFIP is discussing continuous flood coverage,
Yes, sir.
does it have to be FEMA or could it be private?
It's a NFIP only.
That's what I figured, so.
If you exit out, the question was, okay, if I've had continuous flood coverage, let's say, you know, hey, someone came in, I had federal flood insurance for the first 5 years that I had this condo assured, okay? All of a sudden, there's a property carrier that comes in and says he will include flood on his condo association. So the association goes ahead and picks up the private and drops the federal flood. And they were basically a pre-firm building and being compliant, continuous renewal grandfather. Well then, all of a sudden Sandy hits, okay? And now that Sandy's hit and they took a $20 million loss on that condo association, at the next renewal they say, we don't want to have any part of it. But you've talked them into keeping it, but less the flood insurance. Now you got to go back to the federal government. You're coming back to the federal government at its current rate. You lost your continuous renewal grandfathering in that case. Okay? Does that help you with that one?
Yeah.
Okay. I know we're getting onto a lot of things that, you know, that this is, but I think this is setting a good groundwork for where we want to go with all this, okay? I'm hoping and I can keep questions going because this is really about an hour presentation, so the questions will make it go longer for me too. Plus I like to talk. Okay. The very first part of this law that was implemented is January 1, 2013. And it's on renewals on January 1, 2013. To be honest with you, but it is a huge portion of what the Jersey Shore has. We have a lot of non-primary residences in this area. So, well, we have that in this island as well. Let me clarify that, okay? But basically what you need on it, if you were in a pre-firm, prior to 74, the community entered it, hazardous area, so that's the A's or the V's and you see Zone D, they're increasing those renewals up to 25% annually until you get to the full actuarial rate. The definition of a non-primary residence, I don't define it that way. Let me tell you what a principal residence is. You must live in it, you or your spouse must live in it 80% of the time. Okay? If you live, you got a place here in New York and you got a place in Miami and you do 50-50, then guess what? Neither one of them is your principal residence according to the federal government. I don't care where your tax domicile is because it's more than likely in Florida in that particular case. At least that's what I found out as I went in the summer. I'm going through the Jersey Shore and I said, damn, they got more Floridians in this damn area than I've ever seen. And then the gal that's riding with me, you don't understand. This is where they're from, but this is where their domicile is for tax purposes. And I said, oh, okay, now it makes sense why all these Bimmers and Mercedes and all that are running around with Florida plates. I'm like going, I thought I was saying back working in Florida, they had more Florida plates than they had New Jersey plates. I was like, wait. But anyway, but that's what is definition of a non-primary. We've already talked about the other one. Again, everybody always asks me, what is the question, what is the true actuarial rate? If you honestly answer, what is the true actuarial rate, it's the current map, base flood elevation, and where they are in reference to it. So until we get to that fully, we're not at it. The pre-firm actuarial rate is the one I told you is being subsidized between 40 and 70%. So your true actuarial rate is going to almost be double what it is currently, okay? That's the easiest way of doing it. Ultimately, we will get to that full rate under this law. So that's the first piece of it. Then we fast forward to October 1, 2013. Yes?
A quick question about base flood elevation.
Yes, sir.
In a dwelling, primary, secondary, whatever, that has a basement or a small area below the grade level, that's the base flood elevation?
The base flood elevation is what...
Could you repeat the question? We couldn't hear it.
Okay. The question was, is what is the base flood elevation? And he asked, he says, if there's a small crawl space or area below the building or the floor of that crawl space or the next highest piece, what is the base flood elevation? And that's the question that was posed to us. The base flood elevation has nothing to do with the structure itself. It is basically the data that the government has provided through its mapping process, which says this is the level where there's a 1% chance of flooding in any given year. So it's basically that, you know, the government basically regulates everything to a 1% chance of flooding in any given year. And as a result so your base flood will vary by zone, perhaps, vary by the community and that, because your topographies change, okay? So it's basically taking all the engineering data and everything else, and all the survey data and everything, and figuring out what is a 1% probability of flooding in any given year, and what is that line, and they draw that line.
So to get the better
So,
rate, they want you at that.
They want you, right, he said to get the better rate, they want you at that line or above. The minimal requirement for a community is to manage it to that line, okay? So that's a federal, so that is the lowest floor of that property is supposed to be regulated to that line, and that would include basements, okay? So that's what they're looking at, is that line, okay?
That does not include crawl spaces though, it's strictly areas where you could walk into that?
Again, there's regulatory pieces where we can go and we can vent things, we can do other things. It says, okay, here's your regulatory piece, and then here's this area below, because it's got certain limited, it might be a crawl space that's completely open, it might be a crawl space that's partially enclosed, has venting. The venting will allow them to now regulate to that floor instead of regulate to a low blood. There are regulations which allow for certain types of use, like basements and crawl spaces and that, but there are some restrictions on what they can and what they can't do as a community. And then they regulate they're still regulating the primary structure and its elements to that base flood elevation is the easiest way for me to say that. I don't know any other way to put that, Jana, unless you got a better way. By the way, I'm sorry. Jana Critchfield is with us today. She is the regional sales manager for New York, okay? So I just want to make sure everybody knows Jana, because she would be the one who would be working with any of the brokers that do business with us, if you haven't had the opportunity to meet her yet. And just a little quick background on her. She has done work on the insurance company side as a rep on the flood side. She worked for FEMA in Sandy, doing claims, working with the NFIP on claims mitigation pieces, or
As the insurance specialist.
insurance. She was the insurance specialist. I'm just trying to say on the claim side for FEMA during Sandy. Came to us in June. It was June, wasn't it?
But
Okay, I got that right. And then also she's had experience on the broker side. Okay, so she's been on your side as well as our side, and as well as on the FEMA side. So a world of information and a great network of contacts, especially at the FEMA level. Okay, so utilize her and her expertise in helping you through some of this stuff. So this is what I'm talking about right now is renewals. The first renewal I talked about was January 1, non-principal residents. They start losing their subsidy on their renewals starting January 1. Then we get into October 1, and these are the next pieces that are losing it on renewals. Business property is what the law says. When we define it, it's non-residential classified properties. Okay? So anything that's classified non-residential will start, that's pre-firm, special flood hazard areas. We are starting to charge 25% more until they get to actuarial rates. The other ones that we're also doing in this group are severe repetitive losses. The severe repetitive losses are basically those that have had 4 or more flood claims of $5,000 each, or 2 or more which exceeds the market value, or any flood loss that has, and then the very last one, any property that has incurred more than the market value over its lifetime is also part of this group that's losing the subsidy. This is the biggest drain on the program, and that's one of the things that they're putting the biggest losses, and they're also being subsidized. So we're pulling them out first, is what the government has said. So hopefully to help to mitigate that process a lot faster. So on renewals at this point, I'm going to go through. We've only done non-principal residences, severe repetitive loss, and then business or non-residential. So that says on October 1, what if it's my primary residence I'm pre-firm special flood hazard area? You're not losing your subsidy. If I'm 2 to 4 family, other residential, or RCBAP, Residential Condominium Building Association policy, you're not losing your subsidy as of October 1, 2013. So they're not seeing any loss of subsidy at that point for October 1. Everybody's okay with that? And of course, post-firm we said was what? Already actuarially sound? We also said B, C, and X is already actually sound. So those renewals. So this is, according to the federal government, this initial thing, there's about 5.6 million policies in the program. This initial phase on renewals is only impacting about 300,000 plus of the federal government's policies. Very minor portion of it, okay? Depends on the area you're with, how much that percentage really hits, you know. I came out of Pinellas County in Florida, and it is one of the most dense pre-firm areas, and they're getting hit hard, percentage-wise, okay? So, but anyway, that's what's happening on that particular. All right, let's get to, did I move twice? Yes. So then we've got to move to the next piece I want to move to is, that's your renewal. Let's go to new business now. And this is what's killing, in my opinion, killing real estate markets some. Because any subsidy going forward, starting October 1 on new business, won't be available. So if I was paying $1,265 a year for my policy, okay, I can't pass that on to the person who's buying it. That's a subsidized policy. They've got to come in at new business, full actuarial rate, which means what we said. My zone is AE 10. That's the base flood. What is my lowest floor compared to that? That is the rate that I pay. My condominium association, if they went private and they decide to come back in November 1, 2013, instead of that being a $300,000 premium, it's probably over $1 million would be my guess, okay? So that's the significance of this. However, there are those properties where the property's lowest floor is above base flood elevation. If there's, you know, your biggest dilemma is when we rate a basement, we use the basement floor. And in most cases, that's going to be below base flood.
It makes so little sense because we cover so little in a basement.
Right.
That's what I don't know.
And the comment is it makes so little sense because that's what we cover, and we cover so little in a basement. And I know, I want to just back up on that comment real quick. What you should have learned through Sandy, this is not about putting you back to what you were prior to the loss. This is about putting you back into a functional habitat or a functional building. Basements were never designed to be my man cave. They were never designed on a condo association initially to be a 70,000 plus theater. Hey, they're there. We had one on the Hudson River that flooded. The seats alone in this theater in this condo association, it was in a basement, was 70 grand. Okay? They were never designed to that. So to keep the people in a habitat, I don't need all that stuff. What is covered, we'll put them back in a functional habitat. And that's the difference, and that's the biggest perception problem that this program has, is people are expecting that this will do just like my other property insurance and put me back like I was prior to the loss. And unfortunately, a lot of people got a rude awakening from Sandy that, no, this program has put you back in a functional habitat. So it's that. But again, there are elements there. That's the guidelines that they use, is to rate from the basement there. And figured in that this is what we pay there. So your rated table is adjusted to allow for the fact that you got limited exposure in the basement, then you got your real primary risk starting up here. So I can't say it isn't considered. It's considered, but it's not considered in anything you will visibly see, other than if you compare the rates of a building without a basement at a -5 or a -4 versus a building with a basement at a -5, you will see significantly difference in actuarial rates. Okay? Yes, sir.
Can you just be clear? I've been seeing a lot of situations with buildings or residences on the South Shore of Long Island elevated. And since they have basements, how does that impact their new flood rates?
Buildings elevated.
They were at a certain base elevation, and now all of a sudden they're building it up to get above that base elevation. Are they going to see any savings in their flood rates?
Okay.
Doing that?
The question is, and we're seeing people elevating along the shore,
Exactly.
as opposed to leaving it here,
And they
okay?
still have the basement. Are they gonna see any,
As long as they still have the basement,
they're not gonna see anything.
they're not gonna see any change. Okay? I mean, technically, there's 9 diagrams. I mean, the question was, okay, are they gonna see, they elevated their house, which puts most of the risk out of harm's way, but yet they maintain the basement, okay? According to the diagrams we have to rate from that basement. So therefore, they haven't really mitigated their loss at all. It's only if they basically eliminate that basement, and if they still have something that comes below the elevated portion, I'm going to start with a rate at the elevated portion, and I'm going to start looking at charging for the enclosure below it. And in that place, it will impact it, okay? But as long as I have that lowest floor below grade, it's in an enclosed area in a basement, I'm going to that basement, you know? So that floor has to come up in order to do it. And that's going to be, you got to be very careful, because people are going to be coming to you and asking you, well, what can I do to lower my rates? What can I change in my building structure? You're not an engineer. You're not, that's not your expertise. They really need to get with their community officials and get with their own architects and engineers. And you can sit there and say, look, before you go too far, once you have a concept and once you have some numbers in a drawing or a detailed drawing, bring it to me, then I can get you a rate quote on, and you can see whether or not that's comfortable or not, That's about the best job that you'll be able to do with that. Because get into sitting here starting to recommend, well, you need to do that. I know I went out on one and we said, you got to raise this level of this basement floor. This floor has to at least be at 10 feet. How you accomplish that, you maybe have structural elements, you start busting things up or recommend, you don't know what those structural elements are, so how do you tell them? You can't. All I know is if you get this to 10 foot and this is 10 foot and you've eliminated this area and brought the floor to here, well then we're going to rate it based here, and that's going to achieve this. That's really what you're getting into, is saying, no, here's your base flood. I can show you the rates at different levels, but what do you have to do to achieve that? I can't really make any recommendations, because I had one the other day, a community center down in the Jersey Shore, and it's currently on foundation walls, about 3-foot crawl space on foundation walls, but it's in a V zone, and that it has to have breakaway walls. Well, how can I break away a wall on a foundation wall without completely lifting this structure off, moving this structure over here, eliminating the original foundation elements, now putting in pilings and piers, and then move my structure back over? Now, are you qualified to go into all that engineering stuff? No. Okay, I can't tell him, technically you would have to bring this to where it's no longer on foundation walls. It would have to go up on pilings. Pilings, piers, posts, or columns. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to end up paying this rate based upon the dirt level in this crawl space. And that's technically what this one would be. And so that's really all you can do, is say, here's the rating elements and what drives rate, and therefore this is what your architect has to do. And there's manual pages, you might be able to provide them or not. Understand this too. This is a dilemma. You're balancing fire code, you're balancing ADA code, you're balancing all these different things, okay? And as a result, these things don't gel, so communities have to make adjustments for that. When they make an adjustment. I had one in New Orleans where it was a historical code. It said you had to enter the building from the street level, because all shops along Canal Street in New Orleans are street level entries. We won't allow steps to get up into it. So if I allowed that, they had to allow an entry in a foyer level that was 3 feet below base flood. It's 1,000 square feet of a 40,000 square foot building. And so they did the ADA ramp in that little 1,000 square feet area. It had a few steps going up. But basically, from a rating standpoint, I have to rate from that foyer. Even though they mitigated the entire risk to 39,000 square feet to what? To 1 foot above base flood in this particular instance. So, well, fortunately enough, in that case, we worked with them, and we showed everything that they did and what they were up against, and FEMA gave it the special consideration and said, we will allow you to rate it from the 39,000. So if they've done everything in their possibility to regulate it or mitigate it to code, based on code enforcement, we can approach them and say, present the evidence, and they may consider it and allow it to do it. You know, but sometimes they're stubborn as hell, you know. I got a airplane hangar that was built on Lakefront Airport in New Orleans in a V-zone. How the hell do you elevate a V-zone airplane hangar? Unless we're going to Star Wars days, right? You bring your little plane up underneath it and the little thing comes down and lifts it up into the air hangar, right? Okay? But that isn't what the design is. You had to build it on, you know, to handle load and handle all the things that the weight of these planes. And so it's a slab on grade. But they worked with, it was paid for with public assistance dollars, so we as taxpayers under FEMA paid for it, right? And they got with FEMA and their engineers agreed to allow them to build it with certain precautions from they had certain velocity requirements and all those things. When it got kicked to the chief underwriter, the chief underwriter on the federal government program, we asked him for special rate considerations given all the circumstances and the engineering and everything. And as a result is, he says to us, no, there's exposure here, so I'm not going to give any special rate consideration. So that airplane hangar's costing them in excess of $84,000 a year. Okay? There's 3 more to come online. What's going to happen, just to give you an idea of what's going to happen in this, they're going to use the remedy under the Stafford Act that says that this is unaffordable. They will petition their insurance commissioner, and he will waive the flood insurance requirement going on under the Stafford Act for future events. So guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We're going to pay for that airplane hangar again in the future. Unless FEMA's engineers were right on this last loss. Because they're going to apply for the waiver and drop the flood insurance. Because when I start adding 84,000, 84,000, 84,000, 84,000, plus all the other stuff that they're having to insure on that, they can't afford to operate in a profit area. And again, that's a small regional airport. But I just want you to understand is that's some of the workings going on in this. Okay? We got a little bit off of the subject here, but I hope that helps you. But in some cases, people will make modifications and they find out they didn't do anything. So the key thing is there is in the manual what they call a lowest floor guide. And it puts out, not the manual, actually FEMA has. There is one in the manual as well. But FEMA puts out a brochure called the lowest floor guide, which actually takes and puts all the zones on it, A's, and all the zones V's. And then what you can do from that standpoint is you look at what building looks like your building, and then it will tell you where we're going to rate it from and why we're going to rate it from there. That's the best guide that I can give them. I could also give them the lowest floor guide information that is that whole section of the manual. If you need the lowest floor guide, I always go to FEMA.gov and I do that search engine and hit lowest floor guide, and there's a PDF which is about a 4-page PDF, and it'll give you that information. And you know, I always give manual information that FEMA puts out because that's their information as opposed to mine. So look, I can only tell you where I have to rate it from for these types. When I sit with developers, I'm educating them on the types of diagrams and what they can do. You know, if I'm building a building off the ground in a V zone, I'm going to use that as an example. Off the ground in a V zone. I know immediately if it's off the ground in a V zone, it's going to have a horizontal member that building sits on. We rate it from the lowest point of that horizontal member. Because that's the first piece where water's going to hit it. So it's off the ground with nothing underneath it, that's where I'll rate it from. And it has no obstruction here, so that's my rate point. That is my lowest rating element that I can get right there. It's my lowest table. As soon as I put any enclosure, because the manual says you can put up to 299 square feet in an enclosure, as long as it has breakaway walls, it's not finished, it's used for parking or storage only. Okay? But as soon as you put that 299, I go from a free of obstruction table to with an obstruction table. And as a result is my rate just doubled. Code enforcement says I can enclose the whole area below there as long as it's built with breakaway walls and it's used for parking and storage or building access. Well, in that case, I'm going to use the beam. I'm going to charge for the enclosure because now I'm with obstruction. So I've got a with obstruction rate, and because I'm graded at $299, I'm going to surcharge at first layer. Okay? So that's what I do when I teach developers. I'm telling them, when you build this, you need to consider this. Unfortunately, they go to code enforcement, and code enforcement says you can do this. So that's our big dilemma, is code saying, well, I did everything code said. You're going to run into those things as well. So anyway, let's go on this. New business real quick. New business elevation certificate is required for all new business when you're in a special flood hazard area. That's the easiest thing to make. Used to be, you know, right now when you get a new quote and the guy's in a 1990 built building, right? It's built in 1990. If he's built in 1990, he's post-firm more than likely. I need an elevation certificate as an A or a V. Well, now it doesn't matter when he's built. If he's in an A or a V zone, I need an elevation certificate to rate him. That's basically what the new business is saying. So what it's doing is saying for that pre-firm building, we're going to get the rate of where it is exactly in reference to the base flood elevation. Yes, sir?
I have a situation where we have a client who's about to purchase a home. It's in an AE, it's a secondary, pre-firm, but it does have an elevation certificate.
It with that elevation certificate on. So it's because we can do post-firm elevated rate. That's what this really is.
So that
Okay? If you don't, if you're not using the elevation certificate, and that's how it's currently rated, then I have to use it on this new business. Also, too, which this is the next piece of this. So new business on pre-firm buildings, I must. In the past, what we were able to do is voluntarily use on a pre-firm and elevation certificate.
Right.
Well, now it's no voluntary.
You got
It's
it.
mandated.
You got it, you use it.
Okay? You have it, you have to use it. And also, while we're there, you can use an old elevation certificate. But I'll go into more detail about that in a little bit. Yes?
So transferring the same situation though, the seller currently has their flood policy. So I spoke with Wright Flood, and they said to me that the new purchaser can purchase, they can do the name change, okay, from the seller's current flood policy, and then the new rates will become effective upon that renewal.
Okay.
So if we do a name change,
Okay, we're going to talk about assignments, which was what basically the question is seller and buyer, and then moving, signing a policy over from the buyer, I mean the seller, to the buyer by signature, which can be done in the program. That's what I'm going to cover just here. And if I don't answer it, come back to me. Okay. Basically, so any new business written after October 1 has to have an elevation certificate pre-firm. It's getting full actuarial risk rate, no matter where it is in reference to that. If you lapse your policy as a current insured, lapse means you got past your grace period. Grace period is effective date plus 29. It's a 30-day grace, but you better count the effective date, otherwise you're too late, because it goes in effect 12:01 a.m. That's your first day. Okay, so effective date plus 29. I let my policy lapse after October 1. When I come back to you to reinstate it, I need that elevation certificate to be full actuarial rate. So people who let their pre-firm policies lapse will get rude awakenings in that case. The last piece is what you were talking about. I sold my building to Joe, okay? And he wants to take over my policy on the date of sale after October 1. Our sales date is set for 11/1. He's going to take over my policy, okay? And if I sign my policy over and then on the active sale date he takes it over 11/1, when he takes it over, we are going to request whoever's representing him to provide us with an elevation certificate if we don't have it. And we will apply that elevation certificate and charge him the pro rata difference for the remainder of his period.
see, when I spoke with a underwriter specialist, they told me no, not until the renewal date.
Well, again, if it's after October 1,
After October 1.
yeah, I mean, this is where the dates get confusing, because if it's before, you can assign it, no change, and then the next renewal will do it.
So if it's
So it could be a
September 28th,
miscommunication,
then
is
we're
all
good
it-
September 28th.
Pardon?
If it was September 28th, then we're good.
Yeah, if I were going to sale tomorrow with Joe, if I went to sale tomorrow with Joe and I signed over my policy to him tomorrow, he will keep that rate till renewal. And then in renewal, I'll be looking possibly a further implementation in this law. Okay? Everybody's with us on those? Could y'all hear her, or should I go into that more? But anyway, so we're talking new policies, policies that are lapsed, or policies that are assigned. And notice it goes to all classifications, and then there's only one exception, which is if the policy is assigned, gifted, or transferred to an estate trust. Okay? We expect to see some more trusts coming around. Okay? So, but basically, it's eliminating. It's saying, going forward, if you're buying this house, this is your premium. Buy it or not. And that's what's happening. I'm going to tell you, if I'm buying Joe's house today, and I know it's pre-firm, for what I know, before I enter into a contract, I'm asking for permission to have an elevation survey shot on his house. Then I'm going to take that elevation survey and I'm going to go see my broker. And when I go see my broker, I say, give me my rate. If I'm not comfortable with their rate, I don't enter into that contract. That's what's happening right now. That's what's happening right now. You know, I go to purchase that property and I see that that premium is $15,000 a year. I'm going to walk. I'm not going to go there.
So
Okay?
you have real estate market like coming to a grinding halt because
In those instances, you're absolutely seeing contract. In some states, don't, depending on the state and their contract laws, you're seeing contracts being rescinded, people walking away from contracts, losing their deposits. You're seeing all sorts of reactions like that coming out. Again, at this point, that affects all pre-firm property, and it depends on where they are. Some areas of the country, we're seeing actually with new mapping that the pre-firm properties are coming out better with the elevation certificate. So it's going both ways, but you only know until you get that piece of paper. I don't know if I don't have an elevation certificate. So my question to you is, knowing what you know, if you've got a person buying a pre-firm house, are you going, if you're buying a pre-firm house, are you going to buy it without knowing where it is elevation-wise if it's in a hazardous zone? Or are you going to walk away from buying in hazardous zones and go buy in a BC or X? I mean, the design of it literally gets premium, gives now informed consumers on risk, and moves people away from those vulnerable areas to where? To areas where the risk is safer. It does move the program further along to what it said its intent was, is privatization. Y'all all agree with that? It's painful, and we're also seeing that with wind and wind mitigation and stuff like that. So we're dealing with two things in coast area. Yes?
what are the banks going to do as far as forced place flood insurance? They
Well-
lapse their policies. I'm not buying flood insurance. What are the banks going to
The
do?
question is, what are banks going to do with forced place? They're going to continue to operate the way they've had.
Forced place.
They're just going to force place the coverage when they don't have coverage in force, and then charge whatever that monthly premium is to that person. I will tell you, in some cases, it might be cheaper forced place than it will be under the federal program. But keeping in mind, that's a single interest, and it's only building. But for some people, they say, hey, I can't afford to stay in it otherwise. And can you flip it? Probably not. If it can be mitigated, you could possibly flip it, but guess what you just did? You took a reduced price so that they could absorb the cost of elevating it or mitigating it. Okay? Gentleman in South Louisiana, Plaquemines Parish, was quoted in Wall Street Journal, and actually he was using old numbers, so I'm going to revise his numbers. He's paying $633 a year right now for $250 on the building, $100,000 on content. Okay? His premium, as of after the renewal of October 1, if he were to go full actuarial rate, he's going through a map change. He's currently 3 feet above base flood, and that's what he built to. So that's why it's only 600 and something bucks for 250 and 100. He's in an AE zone. Now, the map change shows it going from a base flood of 1 to a base flood of 9. He's now literally 6 feet under. His new premium's over $15,000 a year at a -6. Okay? He's an agent of ours. You know, he's a broker that works with us. And that gentleman says they're going to phase it in. That part of the law will be phased in over 5 years. He says when it gets to the point where I think it's not worth it, I'll let it go. My house is paid for. So he's got at least that luxury. He said, but I've already gone to my tax assessor and asked him to reduce the market value on my house. So that's part of the argument going to Congress right now. Is the economic impact is not only foreclosures and people not being able to afford this, It's also the fact that you're gonna devalue property, and therefore you're gonna devalue your tax base. And that's a reality of it. I'm trying to give you everything I can think of in this. Yes, sir?
Could this thing be repealed? Yeah.
Absolutely. I will say this is an act of Congress. The only way it can be changed is literally through an act of Congress. And that's why the delay, so that they can look at it closer, so that they can look at it either to repeal it or phase it in over a period of time, and that. Now, whether you agree with the law or not, the only way you can impact it is you got one congressman and two senators. You need to engage those three, okay? Whatever your position is on this. And then if you need to engage them, we all in this business have extensive networks that reach beyond our own area. The House is pretty much a layup to get things done, because 50% of the population or more live in coastal United States. So we're well represented in the House on what goes on here. That's why the House has already gotten a delay on fiscal year 2014 on implementing any of the 2014 changes. The Senate got it out of appropriation but can't get it to a full Senate vote. The Senate is where your struggle is, because you only have 20 coastal states. 20 times 2 is 60, and that's not a full majority in the Senate. And so your uphill battle is in the Senate. So whatever your argument is, you have to show the impact of this, not only here, but where it's going to impact any area that has flood-prone areas, that has pre-firm buildings, or even the post-firm when we get to it. So use your networks and try to build the case beyond here to get more support across the country. And let me say this. We have military bases. We have large ports that are in coastal areas. How much of our economy is driven in our coastal ports? How much of our economy is driven in our military bases? And it's not just the rich people living in this area. You know, you can't tell me to cook at a military base is the one that's really sitting here saying, well, I live on the coast because I can afford to. I live on the coast because that's where I'm making a living. If I'm a roughneck out in the Gulf of Mexico, I'm on the coast because that's where the petrochemical business is, okay? And I'm just making a living. You know, I'm an average Joe. I'm not, and that's the misnomer, is this can devastate economically is what the argument beyond goes. The argument beyond is it just doesn't affect coastal. It affects anywhere there's a floodplain, okay? So anyway, that's that piece of it. Now, we will give, just so you know, we will give notification regarding to the policyholders on renewal between 100 and 120 days. We have to non-renew the existing policy. This kind of jumped on. I got jumped a whole new level, I just realized. We taught new business. Remember we talked, the law came in July 6, 2012, and then it's enacted 10/1. September the 30th, being rated, it's only allowed for a year. Provisional rates are just as high, okay? It's only allowed for a year, but it allows you to keep a policy in force until you get the additional information. If you have a claim while it's tentative or provisional rate, you may have lower coverages because all the premiums submitted would only pay for that amount of coverage. Or possibility is that you also, well, there's no possibility. The federal government says for us to settle a claim, we must first determine the actuarial rate. So I need that EC anyway. So try to get the ECs in all purposes. But when we do these renewals, July 6th in that corridor, tentative rates are going to come into play. And then there's a huge demand being put on surveyors right now. So that's the thing that we're seeing. But you're going to get notification to your insured and to yourself. We have to non-renew it to rewrite it on the next renewal since it fell in that corridor. That's really all this is stating. Then this tells you a little bit about it. It's telling you that, you know, hey, premium, you know, we must be received along with the premium 30 days of the expiration of grade date shown on your policy. The elevation certificate, we're going to need 2 clear photos within the last 90 days, front and back of the building. A renewal app signed by the agent. And then the annual premium. After the 30-day grace period, if we don't get, none of that is submitted, then we go to new business, okay? So that's unfortunate there. When we get in flood zone Ds, do we have any real flood zone Ds in this area? Flood zone Ds are basically submit for rates, and we still need all the information to allow for rating. October 1, they will be affected in the same way, as well as with endorsements. That's most of the news on pre-firm and moving that pre-firm subsidy out on new business. I'm going to go through these. These are just some notes to make as we go through of October 1. October 1 is a rate change of 10%. Every October we've been taking rate changes, and now it's 10. Under this legislation, though, it said we could raise the rate as much as 20%. Okay? But it just so happens this October 1 is 10. And it's based on the rate class, and it applies to that. Those classification occupancy types, all flood zones, all pre- and post-firm buildings. We also now can't do this, but it's part of the law. It's installment payments. I'm not a fan of this one, but installment payments will allow them to where they can do it. It's currently, rulemaking is being done on it, because how are they going to handle it? What will be the cancellation rules and that type of thing? All these things. It's currently being taken a look at, so it's figured it's going to be from the date of the law was passed, about 2 years before we get that in the full enactment. There's also coming October 1 a reserve fund. So we've had rate changes, we lose some subsidies, we got reserve funds, we got all these different, and it all says more premium, more premium, more premium, right? Establishing a reserve fund. This fund is to fund future catastrophic events. It is basically 5% of your premium. So, and it's after you calculate everything, and it's on the next slide from that standpoint. But basically what it is for every dollar they pay on the reserve fund goes into the reserve fund. We as a WIL carrier get paid an expense allowance, a percentage of the premium. This is not in our expense allowance. This is also not in your revenue. So if you're seeing policies after October 1 and there's a reserve fund, understand is program your system just like you do for a federal fee, that you're not getting paid commissions on that portion. Okay? When we were at the NFIP conference, they said that that fund can go as high as 15% of premium. It's just going in at 5. So I don't know what will happen in the future, but that's what the design of it has. If it's if you have a preferred risk policy or preferred risk policy extension, it does not get a reserve fund fee. Okay? So this is only your standard rated policies. And realize it's a separate cost calculated based on the premium after the deductible impact, ICC, and the CRSN. So we figure everything and then we do it. And then we add it and the federal policy fee to it. This is the one we talked about sometime in 2014. This one actually will get more screaming than the current one that's being implemented. What this one's saying is that you currently, as of, and I'm going to pick a date, October 1, 2014, because that's sometime in the latter part of 2014, and we do most of our changes in October. So let's say October 1, they decide to implement this section. That's your last date we talked about. What it says is, if you've gone through a map change since the law was enacted, who can tell me when the law was enacted? July 6, 2012. So I had to have a map change since that, and we get to the implementation date. Every policy written in that community will be then written based on the current map and its base flood elevations and go to full actuarial rate. Does everybody understand that? So, I'm in a C zone right now, and I'm being grandfathered, and a new map comes out after July 6th, then on my renewal after October 1, if I was remapped in an AE 10, I'm going to full flood actuarial rate. So they're going to be looking, I lose my grandfathering, they're going to be looking for my elevation certificate and where I am in reference to the base flood. Or if I just hit a BFE like it is going on in New Jersey. Some of the proposals are changing the BFE 2 feet up. I built to the 10, and now I'm a 12. That map gets adopted after July 6th, and we get to the implementation. It's the 2 triggering mechanism of 10/1/2014. My next renewal, we'll do it. None of the maps have been made effective yet, so that wouldn't matter at this point. Until you change both, you got to implement and map. So I'll use 2 examples. Right now, there's the Orleans Parish, just to give you an idea. Katrina happened in 2005. New Orleans is still operating on a firm that was dated 3/1/1984. Their next firm is supposed to be effective July 2014. So it took them 30 years to get a new firm out. But when that July 2014 firm goes into place and this part gets implemented October 1, every person in New Orleans will be at full flood risk on their next renewal. Now, let's say here, I just use as an example, let's say the mapping for the Jersey Shore isn't made effective till January 1, 2015. I'm just throwing a number out. It's not accurate, okay? But I'm trying to give you an example. This goes into effect 10/1/2014 implementation date. I still hadn't had a map change. When I get to January 1, 2015, my second trigger got hit. When that happens, then any renewal after January 1, 2015 will then go to full flood risk. So as long as you've not had a map change, it won't get triggered till the map change. And then, so you have two triggering mechanisms. So, unfortunately, you know, in some cases, actually in the Jersey Shore, I've seen, based on the original advisories, which are simply advice, okay, everybody was looking at grandfathering. That eliminates all the other pre-firm subsidies. In other words, your primary residence, your condominium association, all those various different levels, you've just eliminated all of it. Okay? My guy that was -17 and in an RC BAP, his subsidy continues as long as he keeps paying his premium. But as soon as the area that that condo association remaps, we then will look at what that elevation of that basement was in that condo against the base flood on the new map that gets adopted, and on that next renewal, he will get hit with the full flood rate. He lost his pre-firm subsidy. He lost, so now we only had 300,000 properties affected. Now the 1.1 million pre-firm properties are affected, and then anybody that was grandfathered is affected. Okay? So it gives you a scope of it. I'll give you a lady, this lady was damaged in Katrina, raised her house 3 feet post-Katrina, 3 feet above the base flood close Katrina, based on advice by the federal government, the advisory base flood elevations. She spent over $60,000 to elevate it. Now her new map is coming out and she's going to be 3 feet below base. That's what one of the biggest arguments about this is. You did everything the government told you to do, and now you're being penalized because that mapping is being changed. Okay? So those are the kind of things. It says it only affects a certain percentage of the program. I would charge Congress and say, hey, today it might, but every property in this program could be subject to remapping at some point in the future. So it has the potential of touching 100% of the properties in this program. And they're following the best advice you're giving them. Okay? So that's what really this has done. It's going to phase those in on renewal at the level of 20% for 5 years. It's a definitive 5 years. So they won't get hit all at once. It will phase in over 5 years. These are just some other sections of the law, and we're going to just quickly go through them, and then I'll open up questions. Multifamily properties, you know, like your other residential is your classification for flood. When you got apartment buildings which are greater than, 4 families, so with 5 families, could be 50 families, whatever it is. Right now, the most you can buy on that residential property is $250 and $100. When this section is implemented, they will then raise that limit to $500 and $500. That's been the only change in limit, is to the other residential. The only thing that's given us problem with this one, on this section in the rulemaking, there's one classification that's other residential that has an exception to it, and that is the RC BAP, and it's $250 per unit. So, does this $500 mean that the RC BAP is going to now be only $500? And that was not the intent of Congress, so they may have to revisit this in the law and strike the law up in order to get it. So this is why this is having so much problem with legal and rulemaking, is they don't want to, the intent was not to lower the amount available for associations. The intent was to raise the amount available for these multifamily structures, which are significant to our housing industry, okay? Then there's also some new deductibles that will come out, and you've got pre-firm and post-firm deductibles driven, as well as coverage amount deductibles. If that don't confuse things even more. Okay? Enforcement, you guys are starting to see already lenders saying, I need flood on this, I need flood on that, and getting much more aggressive. The current law said that you only had a fine for every non-compliant loan for a lender, a $350 violation. that's now been moved to a $2,000 violation, okay? The big difference is the 350 had an annual cap of 100,000. The 2,000 has an annual cap unlimited. So your local lenders were doing a real good job of enforcing under the old law. Everybody's going to be doing a real good job under the new. Your Wells Fargo, your Chase, your Bank of America. Look, I'm the CEO of Wells Fargo. I go to my compliance department for flood and I say, hey, you guys do the best job you can. We're going to make sure we're trying to do this appropriately to show a good faith effort. However, if you guys screw up, I'm going to line item $100,000 because it's going to cost me a lot more to cross my T's and dot my I's than $100,000 on my entire portfolio. Okay? Well, now I, as the CEO, no longer have that luxury because it can really significantly hit my profits. So that's one thing you do. I'm already seeing them also enforcing a part of the requirement under secured loans under the program, which says all improvements on that property that are insurable for flood must be insured. So all improvements would include my shed in the back. Sorry, Doug. That's more of a shed. But anyway, if it's a detached garage, we extend to a detached garage used solely for the parking of automobiles or storage. Once you put a bathroom in there, guess what? It's habitable, it's not covered. So if I have a shed in my backyard that just has nothing, it's on a slab, it's got my lawnmower in it, a few bikes and a little tool room or whatever, whatever I dabble with, if that's in the back, my policy doesn't extend to that. So these lenders are now saying that's an improvement, it secures the loan, so you need flood insurance on it. Most of those are non-regulated. A lot of the communities don't regulate those little bitty outbuildings for that. I did an Episcopal camp down in Point Clear, Alabama, and we had to insure for the lender. They had a swimming pool and a little bath changing area. They had to insure that. They had a little slab-on grade, had 4 or 5 different lawnmower pieces of machinery in it, and all their weed whackers and that. And that was just built right on the ground so that they have easy access to it. They needed insurance on that. So we're seeing more and more this law is being enforced and being enforced significantly. Yes, sir?
Just a quick question. What amount of limits would the bank require for that enforcement? The loan that's outstanding or just up to FEMA requirements for that building?
Technically, most of them are looking just to secure the loan, but when they start saying improvements, they're actually asking for the value of that particular building
So they're
when
going
it's a little small one.
They're going to need excess of what FEMA can provide them.
Well, no, you write one policy on this building and one policy on that one. So you won't ever be on any one structure beyond the statutory maximum of what FEMA asks for that structure. But they can insure ask for the replacement value or the maximum available on any structure that secures that loan. So that would be a separate policy, yes. So it all just depends, but that's one thing. And then after July 6, 2014, any outstanding or loans entered into that is a mandate to escrow. Okay. One good thing I like about that helps offset the installment payment crap. They're paying their installments in their note, and then therefore the bank's paying for it as opposed to that. I want to make sure that you hear, and we'll get into that in the Q&A in just a second. And that was just notification of availability of flood. That'll be done on the front end more so as you sell. These are other things in the law, and one thing that I like to add, remember I said initially, it's a movement towards privatization. In its current state, if I asked you, 25 to $26 billion in debt, and the way we rate it with all the subsidies and all the grandfathering that, right now, you would agree, there's not a reinsurer in the world that would touch this program. If they make all these moves, do you think the appetite will increase for them to look at reinsurance? Absolutely. And the director now has the right to buy reinsurance if he can find it. It's starting to smell more like an insurance program than it is a federal government program. But it has significant ramifications. Okay? But these are all some of the other things that they're working on in it. Mapping is a big issue. That's what was on the Today Show. And it's all budget driven. And Congress slashed the crap out of the budget. Excuse my language. And so what we're having now is communities pushing back and saying your information is not valid, and arguing it from datums and engineering stuff, and have actually delayed a lot of the mapping changes that are coming forward. Congress needs to fund the mapping piece. You won't invite private industry, you won't invite anybody into this, and you and I as a constituent, if I gotta pay a dang actuarial rate, I wanna make sure that the information you base my risk on is the latest and greatest information. And I'm gonna demand that as a policyholder in the federal government. So mapping is very key. Mapping not only needs to be funded at when you do it, you use the latest and greatest, you need to do it on a consistent basis. I'm feeling the ramifications of 30 years of no mapping changes. You don't think the floodplain in the greater New Orleans area changed a lot in 30 years? If you'd have been getting mapping every 5 years, don't you think that developers might have developed that area differently? Don't you think that perhaps they might have done other mitigation projects or looked for other mitigation methods from FEMA to help in a cost share or an appropriation to help them manage their floodplains? So you not only have to give them the latest grades, you got to give them consistent information, because that's why you see drastic changes from a $633 premium to a $15,000 premium. Is if they would have had that information, they'd have known a long time ago that those levee systems that are protecting that risk, I said in Plaquemines Parish, were moving towards decertification. And since they were decertification, it's you're all in or you're all out. So they get no credit for that levee system. Now they're doing a pilot program to try to see what does that do. So we're making adjustments because of our past sins. Go ahead and fund it up front and fund it consistently, and then we can manage it. If that premium of $633 probably wouldn't be at 15, and then you could have afforded the rate changes, and you wouldn't have the devastating economic impact of some of those areas. So mapping a very key thing, and that's one thing that we need to stay very focused on and talk when we talk to our congressmen. Look, you're asking me to pay actuarial premiums. I want to be darn sure that the maps you're using have the latest information, and I want to be darn sure you're looking at them on a consistent basis so that my community can help manage my risk. Because I have no control except to rely on you. Okay, that's my own personal piece on the mapping. Yes.
You couldn't be more right. It's the biggest problem. The fact that you guys for 30 years without the mapping, you have all the trouble. What are they doing to, when do we know when your area is going to get? I mean, it's like a thing in your head.
Yeah, maybe I think the best way to say, when do we know when our area is getting mapping and when it's going to be consistently mapped? Right now, look, you have a better chance with your dice on a table in Las Vegas than you're willing to map. The intent's a little bit more.
I can tell you that the FEMA goal, when they started the map modernization program, which started more than a year prior to Katrina, their goal was to remap all communities on a 5-year rolling basis.
Right.
But like Dwayne said, it's driven by the funds to do it. It's very expensive to do a flood study. And so they could do a digital conversion of a map, which is what they did with a lot of the paper maps, to get them all digitized to the point where they are today. But that doesn't give you any additional information. So it's all about money being allocated, and there's not any budget in the government right now.
Yeah, I seem to believe that some of the problems, you don't have the latest and greatest.
Dwayne, can I say something else before you go on to that? I just was talking about this with Doug. Also, when a community gets a new map, a lot of policyholders will get the information from the community, and the community sometimes lets the policyholder think that when they came in this morning, the maps were on their desk, they were brought during the night by some mysterious person, and that was the first they ever saw of them, and they're going to be effective day after tomorrow. It doesn't work like that at all. They go to the community as a preliminary. It takes a minimum of 12 months, and the community has the absolute right to object to anything in the new maps that they don't like. And if they have better topography, they can submit that and people will take a look at it. But at some point in time, there is an agreement and the community must sign off on those new maps. So if you have people telling you that the community just found it in the middle of the night, that's not how it works. And also, it usually will take more like 15 to 18 months. If they're new base floods, they get a 90-day appeal period. There's no new mapping for Nassau or Suffolk right now, except there's going to be one change in Valley Stream, and that's going to be a letter of map revision for an area where the community actually did its own study to get a map change. But otherwise, that's kind of how it is, and if you're up on the news at all, you know right now that government's looking for a way to be open after Monday night at midnight. So mappings are not the highest priority. It's unfortunate because, like Dwayne says, they don't come as quickly as they should, and when you don't remap for 20 or 25 years, and then a whole lot of people go into a flood zone, they're with the mindset that, oh, I bought this, I was never going to be in one. That's what the person told me that sold the house. Well, that's how it was today, sort of like Biggert Waters. This is what we know to be true today.
So I have a risk that's currently a builder's risk, and it was in an X zone when it was being built. And after Sandy, they're telling me it's rezoned to an A.
Okay, that would depend on the county.
It's Queens.
Okay, so there are new maps coming this year for New York.
Coming.
This New York City was slated for new maps regularly prior to Sandy for 2013. And the preliminaries will be delivered to the building department or whomever manages the maps. And then the mayors get involved and all of the elected officials, so.
But if it's rezoned, so it's not rezoned currently, then it's just.
The map is the same map today unless a new map came out that it was before Sandy hit. And until the new map becomes effective, the old map is what is enforced. The community can, at any time they want, get you to build to what the new map standards might be, because it only makes sense if that's shown that way. To be better.
Anna, you want to join me up here? Because there's a mic as well up here as we go through some of this Q&A. I may want to defer some stuff to you. This is her territory. So she's, as you can see, she's very up to date on what's going on in the mapping pieces and that type of thing. So I'm just going to bring her up while we go through this little quick Q&A and some examples. And then ask any questions from out in the field. Is that okay by you?
Sure.
I can move around, or you can either side or whatever. But the one thing, you know, as we watch this stuff, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, budget drives everything, you know, and that's the thing. One of the things that you may see is with the government possibly facing a shutdown. I know my senator in my area are putting tags to this budget bill, if they do an extended budget bill, to delay this program. Okay, so that could happen as early as next week. Okay, just to give you an idea. They're using every effort that they can in those areas that are significantly affected to try to tag something on that says that we are going to, you can't use money from this federal, you know, extension or appropriation for changing the rates on this thing. Now that, for the most part, only addresses fiscal year 2014, and all the changes for October 1, 2013, for the most part, have all come under fiscal year 2013. But it doesn't mean they couldn't write something into that as well, which could reverse something else. This is government. I don't know how else to put that. So that's why I say stay tuned. So we just want to go through some quick questions and answers. Non-primary homes become a primary for the insured. You know, I was leasing it, now I'm deciding. Your policy can be endorsed to the primary residence as long as it was written prior to July 6th. If it was written afterwards, it's a new business item and would be subsidized from that standpoint. I'm on the plus side. Are non-primary homes and non-residential buildings rated in B, C, or X zones subject to the annual 25 rate increase? We pretty much talked about that, and as I said, no for standard rated B, C, or X in policy, they're actuarially rated. However, on the PRP extension, October 1, they're going to see a rate increase of 20%. Okay, those are the ones that should be up at an AE, but are written as an X and kept there. These are also properties that have made a map change on or after changing the flood zone from D, B, C, or X, or A to D. That's the PRP extension policies. Okay, what are tentative or provisional rates? Basically, if we don't have all the information we need to rate a policy, we can either rate it tentatively or provisionally. Usually that means we don't have an EC and all the detailed information that is provided by it. Tentative and provisional rates cannot be endorsed once they're in effect. In order to endorse it, we'd have to receive all the information and as well as all the full premium to endorse it. And as we talked about, my biggest caution is I don't have an EC and I got a tentative or provisional rate, and we get another storm like Sandy or one worse than Sandy, and the building that I have tentative or provisional rate is no longer there. Good luck on getting an EC, okay? But you have to get the actual rate. before you can do it. It could present significant problems at the time of a loss, and that's what I try to hammer home. The insured is being rated pre-firm, but has an old EC. Do you have to get a new EC? The answer is maybe, okay? Because if you look at the evolution of ECs, there's a lot more detail on the current elevation certificate. I mean, now you have the attached garage, and is it vented, and how many square inches? You have, is there an is there an enclosure or crawl space, and its square footage and all that. You also have datum differences in some instances, 1929 datum versus 1988. If we can use it, we will. You definitely have to give us new pictures because they have to be within 90 days. But what I would suggest is if you have one that you question whether you can use it or not, you send it into an underwriting department and say, can I use this EC? If there's not all the information is on the EC, but you as the broker can generate that information, you know, it just was bidding information, then your information plus the EC may still allow us to use the EC. But between what the EC has and you can give us is not enough for us to accurately rate the policy using the EC, then we need to have a new EC. That's the easiest way for me to say that. Because we've got ECs which are manuscript ECs to ones that are all on the mandated federal form that's currently in effect. So that's how we handle it. So when in doubt, before asking them to spend money, go ahead. Keep in mind, you won't have these on pre-firm structures, but you will on post-firm structures. That if they're getting a community rating system credit, they're supposed to be keeping a depository of elevation certificates in a local community. Okay? If you don't know where that is, the easiest place to enter to go get it is go to the permit department, because what do? They regulate how high the building's supposed to be. If they don't know where they keep the ECs, then nobody does. Okay? So I always go to the building safety permit department, and if they don't keep the depository, they will know who does. Okay? So that's what we have. Do we have Justine?
Yeah. So as actually that was mentioned before, a lot of the X's are now being said to have been transferring over to A's. I know in the South Shore, especially like the Belmore section of it is. And my question is, like, if you're a person who owns a secondary home in that area, and we talked about before, you know, somebody selling a home and you could change the flood policy, you know, continue on to the buyer of the new home, is that gonna affect it? Like, if the seller still wants to sell their policy and now they're not sure if they're being grandfathered in yet, and because the new mapping, as you said, it's not really out there and it hasn't essentially become an A yet.
I guess my question is, what county are we talking about? Because there's no map changes in South or Nassau.
Well, I know that part of it became grandfather or is grandfathered in, but they don't know for how long, or if that's going to change with the.
If there's going to be a name change for the new policy, it requires the new rating criteria. If the effective date is October 1 or later.
So would you be able to still, like, would the seller be able to give them their policy now, or?
No, they need to get a new policy because they're going to need to have the elevation certificate.
Right.
The only
and the
time,
photographs.
let me just interrupt. The only time you wouldn't, in my opinion, if you're going to be taking over an existing home or existing business that has a flood policy, if you're making or increasing or extending or refinancing or doing a loan on it, then you just as soon write it new. However, if I'm doing a cash sale for your property, I'm going to want to take over your policy. Because in a cash sale, I have a 30-day waiting period. When I do a loan transaction, I do not have a 30-day waiting period. So we're in September 25th. Is that my date? 6th? Okay, I'm on the wrong day of the week. Okay, I've been sick. So with September 26th, you're in an area of the year that if you wait 30 days, you could have a serious issue, okay? And I'm paying cash for this particular building. So if it's a cash sale, you will want to sign the policy over to that. Now, it's going to be that we're only assigning the current coverage that are in effect. If I need more to get me through my closing, then that will have a 30, I need more than what, I want more than what you have. Let's say you only have 50,000, I want 250,000. That 200,000 would have a waiting period on a cash sale, okay? So the only time I think assignment, and there may be another instance, but that's the only instance that we can come up with, is that if it's a cash sale, rather than write it new business, do the assignment. But if it's going for a loan closure, you gotta write it as new business, whether it's a cash sale or not. But the difference is I'm trying to beat a 30-day waiting period by doing an assignment. Whereas new business where there's a loan, there's no need to go through all that paperwork, just write your own policy and have it come in as full new business. That's the only instance where we find out. Yeah, Doug.
Wayne, in conversations before we began, photos, 2 photos. Photos recommended of what? Is it the crawl space? Is it just the property itself? Does the photos have to be done by a professional, by a surveyor or an adjuster?
Front and back.
Front and back. The thing that they're trying to look at is they want to see how the building is situated on the land. If you look at the various different diagrams the federal government gives you, you see land, you see the building, and then you see airspace above. If you can give us that, that's what we're looking for. We're trying to prove, number one, that you're using the right diagram to rate this thing. So I need to see the adjacent grade through the building and all the way through the roof line. Now in some instances, look, let's face it, some instances y'all got about this much space between places, okay? So to get the front and back might be an impossibility, okay? So you take a multiplicity of photos to try to give us as good of a picture of what I just said. And we have a requirement of front and back, okay? But we've gotten them front and side, but we're trying to determine what is that real type of construction. Is it a slab on grade? Is it with a basement? Is it with, is it a crawl space? Some of that will come out in that picture and help us when we go to underwriting it. You'd be surprised how much of that stuff gets misclassified, not only by us, but also by us, meaning the agency force that's writing it, but also by surveys. I mean, I get surveys, tons call a building a slab, a slab on grade, and I can look at that building from a photo and say, this building's not a slab on grade, it's built on foundation walls. So that's what it helps us. Yes.
No.
Yes, you can.
They're saying, our company is saying there's not a point to doing that, go ahead and get a new piece of business. That's what underwriting is saying.
Well, the answer to your question from the FEMA standpoint is you can assign a policy. They have not gotten rid of the rules of assignment under the program. There's nothing in the manual that says you cannot assign a policy. And I guarantee you, if we have a cash sale, underwriting has to accept it. So, no.
No.
No. When you transfer that, from that date of transfer going forward, if I don't have an elevation certificate on that, our underwriting department is kicking out a letter to you stating we need that information.
And that's why they're saying it's better to write the new policy and have everything as opposed to getting around it for a short period of time. No.
But the thing that you're not getting around is they're talking about underwriting criteria. I'm talking about claims. I'm not, and I know my underwriting department isn't considering the claims aspect of it. So that's something I need to talk to Lisa about. Okay? Because that is a big, from my standpoint, if it's allowable and that's discoverable and there's a claim inside that 30-day waiting period and it was a cash sale, you should know that you can still assign it, and that's what the FEMA manual says, then you possibly could be on.
And I don't think that they're taking the 30-day cash sale into effect.
That's the only area that I know where that may make a difference. And it's huge when you're talking coastal areas, perhaps, because there are people who are doing cash sales on existing properties. But anyway, and we'll address that with our underwriting department. That's a guarantee. What if a pre-firm rated policy is assigned to an estate of trust? Can they continue? At this point, yes, if the initial policy was issued prior to July 6, 2012. I think we covered that as well. Yes. Okay.
No, the mortgage company has the right to ask for the policy. Whenever there's a situation like that, one of the reasons could be that there's a dual zone on that property, And whenever the zone determination is done and the lender gets it, it's always going to have the highest rated zone. Then becomes the burden of proof for the policyholder to go to the community, get a copy of the plot map, and it's the plot map from where it actually was built, so that if the piece of property, say this much of the property is X and this much is AE, but if the house is up here, then it's X. For rating purposes for the policy. The lender can still require the policy.
Yes.
But they do have to rate it at the zone that the property, that the structure sits in.
Another thing that happens is a lot of times the lender will do that. Your insured pays for that zone determination that the lender gets. What I always try to do is say, okay, what are they basing it on? If you call the lender, you just assume talk to that wall, okay? But if you talk to your insured and get them to go to the lender and say, can they provide you with the determination information that they have? At that point, you have who is the vendor, you have their 800 number, and you have their case file number. If you have evidence that says it's different, I mean evidence, not another zone determination, a plot map, a copy of the mapping panel that property actually sits on, or a letter from the community official.
Or you did a fermat off of the FEMA website for Map Service Center.
So, in an AE?
zone, and yet when you, let's say, per se, I go in as a new business to that location, it still shows an X zone on, our quoting side. However, it's really, the map.
If your mapping is, if our zone determination is wrong, which it could be, okay, there's no 100% right zone determination vendor, because they're using latitudes and longitudes, okay, and they could be on different parts of the property. But if ours is wrong and you know it, you need to be giving that information to our underwriting department, and we need to be rating it AE.
Right.
Because you know that the risk is not properly rated, and that's your obligation under the law. So, but basically, I just want to go further. If you get the determination from the insured, you've got the information, you basically can call them and say, look, I have some additional information that I'd like you to revisit. Send them that additional information, and they will revisit it and make their own determination. And if they reverse it, they will send that information on to the bank, okay? But if they accept it, they're not going to communicate with you because of privacy laws, but they're going to communicate back to their customer, the bank. So if they accept it, then the bank will get a new determination and say it's revised. And then that basically goes. If you ever engage at that level where you're doing it, also either write the policy or get a declination signed. Because otherwise you're going to be on an E&O when the claim happens, okay? So dispute resolution, I try to resolve the dispute between me, my company, and the lender. If I can't resolve the dispute, that's when the law says the lender rules, okay? And that's the way. I don't talk to the bank, I talk to their vendor, and their vendor wants to get it right. And I'll send the vendor the additional information I have and let them rule. And it can go either way. I had one where the vendor said, no, I gave him a survey, I gave him a letter from the community official, and said, I think you need to revisit this. It was showing an X from both of those. When I went back into it, the lender came back and said, I'm sorry, but it's still an AE. And then the lender provided the information to the bank, the customer went to the bank and got the information, and what we ended up finding out, they used the wrong parcel number. So it can go either way. So dispute, but in that case, we did what? We solved the dispute and got it right. Yes? Most of the maps, you go on to FEMA's website and go to FEMA Map Service Center, and the current maps are there, and then some historical maps. Not all the historical maps are there. And it's just that, you're entering in an address and doing search, and it brings a mapping panel up, and then you should be able to see the affected firm right through that. In some cases, you can print parts of it. Some of the older maps, you might not be able to print some.
Yeah, all the new digital maps you can print off of the FEMA Mapping Service Center. They're called a fermat. You can print it right on your printer at home.
Y'all guys who are not familiar with fermat, that's Smurfette's twin. Okay. I know it can be done, but that's not something that's acceptable by FEMA.
I'm not going to speak to that because even when I was with FEMA, that was out of my lane. So, but if you have questions on that, you can reach out to the local FEMA office, which is in Manhattan, and ask to talk to someone. You have a question for someone in their risk analysis branch, and get some information there.
I got only about
4 more questions or 3 more questions. We've already talked about if you can't get the EC renewal, but using tentative or provisional rates. I'm just gonna move to it. I wanted you guys to see this. This is the current rate change of 10%. That's how it's gonna affect zones. You're seeing anywhere from less than 1%, which is your PRP, to a high of 26%, which is your PRP extension. But notice the average is 10. So just because October 1 comes and I'm in a post-firm building, or I'm still getting my pre-firm subsidy as a primary resident, doesn't mean I won't see a rate impact. I'm gonna see this rate impact, plus I'm gonna see, if applicable, the reserve fund. So you're getting changes in premium. Well, I thought I wasn't gonna be affected. Well, this is just a normal rate change plus that other piece. Last couple questions. Will there be any other changes? These are some of the other changes. The only one that I really, federal policy fees are changing, our forms are changing, and their flood proofing documentation. This is the one I want to cover real quick. Lending required. Right now, if I got a letter on my existing loan stating me that I had to have flood insurance, and I brought it to you, and you put coverage in, you took that letter, you can put coverage in effective today, okay? After October 1, on my pre-existing loan, if I bring a letter into you looking for coverage after October 1, I have a 30-day wait on that lender required letter. That does not change loan transactions. I mean, realtors jumped up in the air when they first saw this because they say, well, how you mean our sales will be delayed for 30 days or whatever? No, it doesn't take care anything where you're making, increasing, or extending or renewal of a loan or refinancing. Okay, you can make that policy effective on the loan closing. Okay, but if it's a letter on a pre-existing loan after October 1, it now has a 30-day wait. Okay.
Oftentimes the lenders will analyze their portfolio on a regular basis and they'll find a whole handful of policies that don't have flood insurance on it, so then they'll request it. So that's what he's talking about.
So there's a response for that one. Okay. We're gonna go any questions? Yes.
On the provisional incentive rate situation, that mean that happened, claims that
Provisional, it depends, okay? We have to be able to determine the actuarial rate, okay? And until we can, we can't pay it, okay? In some, yes. In some cases, though, we may be using tentative rates, and we can pay the claim because all we did was back down the coverage amount to what the premium would have been paid. And as long as we could only pay up to those new coverage limits. So, but regardless whether if it's tentative or provisional, if we can determine the actuarial rate, we will then go ahead and handle the full claim. If we can't determine the actuarial, we can't move forward. However, even though I can determine the actuarial rate, it could make a difference in coverage amount if I'm using tentative, and I could have a reduced coverage amount. So that's why I said, from a law standpoint, tentative or provisional make you really vulnerable in a claim situation. Okay? Yes, sir.
Has there been any discussion about coverage for people who own co-ops?
Any discussions about people who own co-op versus condo?
As in offering a higher limit of coverage for a co-op? Right, the building for a co-op is $250,000. They can't buy the building coverage. They can only buy the contents.
So is there ever, but yet they're still responsible for those fixtures. Is there any discussion about the, that and all that kind of stuff?
I've been asked this question a lot lately, also along with, are they going to take away the co-insurance penalty for the RC BAP policies? I don't know of any discussion for either of those at this point. For a co-op, you can buy contents only for the unit owner. That's all. And the co-op association can buy a building policy, but it's $250,000 maximum. No. And no, it's other residential.
It's other, that may be one of those that will be one of those that's impacted.
Eventually when
the other residential class is implemented, that's the only way it's going to be impacted.
I'm not sure how they did it. I do know that when they adjusted claims in Sandy, they did take into consideration and paid for things like refrigerators and stoves and things that would have normally been building. Wright did pay for them as contents. Well, it may have, that doesn't mean it was correct. And the finite underwriting happens at the time of the loss.
That's the bad part about this
Yeah.
program. Underwriting is post-loss, not pre-loss, for the most part.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Is there something that, go ahead.
Is that the same for condos and co-ops, or is it just for homes?
Well, condo associations, you're using a whole different form, the RC-BAP
No,
form.
I mean an individual.
The individual doesn't, the maximum on those is 250,000 per unit, which the association should be purchasing. If a person buys an additional policy, very seldom does any additional coverage come from that. They've just,
They can't buy additions at all.
no.
Well,
They can buy their contents,
They can-
and then there's some additions that would be considered,
Correct.
but they usually end up spending a lot more money. And I've asked that of the claims people a number of times, and I worked for FEMA claims
Right.
for a year, so.
And there are instances where the association doesn't insure. So now I can take and pick up my building amount there, okay? Or there are instances where the insurance to value is not where it needs to be, okay? And I've got a loan that can't be secured by the association, so the federal government's lenders require you to buy that additional, so that will happen in the event of that. Because the statutory maximum is still 250 times the number of units, whereas on the co-op, the statutory is 250 for that building. So that's what ends up happening. I may have still some ceiling left in the condo association where the lender will require me to buy it. I have no ceiling left because they probably already bought the 250 max on the co-op, okay? So that's why, for the most part, on the co-op, no. On this, there may be instances where you could pick up your improvements and betterments.
But as a broker, to protect the agency from errors and omissions,
Correct.
please see the charter if you have to. It has to say condominium association. It could be on page 19 where it says the Breezewood Condominium Association Laundry Room, or the Harlem Condominium Association, or the Condominium Association also known as the Harlem Units. Something, it has to be chartered. Otherwise, the condominium policy does not apply to the building.
In a lot of cases, you'll see it, it'll even actually say this is under the condominium form of ownership. And it may not have condominium in the name of the titles or anything.
Right, that's why it
But
says long as
somewhere's
it's
in that bylaw, it will. You know, because we don't, you know, there's a debate about timeshares are not eligible for the RC-BAP. However, in Florida, there are timeshares that are owned in the condominium form of ownership. So FEMA has ruled, well, as long as it's condominium form of ownership, it's available under the RC-BAP. So, you know, that's where the rubber meets road. What do those declarations say? And if you've got doubt in that, you can get those declarations to Jan, and we can run them all the way up the ladder and get a ruling as to is this one, because you're talking significant limit differences. Yes.
Quick question for Jan. Any handouts or pamphlets or anything? A lot of updates to the website that you guys are transition, and a bunch of new questions that were being asked. Great. Some of them, I'm really not sure how to answer. Like additions.
I knew he was going to say that. I knew he was going to say additions and
It
extensions.
would be cool if like there was a question mark to explain it, and you can click on it, so really get clarification.
We had a webinar that taught us all how to use our own software. And actually, the only objection I made to the software was additions and extensions. That we've asked for underwriting and training to clarify, because that's really, and what it is the policy language says that we insure the building at the property address shown and any additions or extensions connected by common roof line, a stairwell, solid exterior ridge wall, an interior solid wall where there's no opening, and I'm missing one, and an elevated walkway, okay? So what they're trying to say is, you know, as a one managing commercial risk, I'm doing this physical school plan, okay? And it's in a C zone. And so they're saying, well, I don't want to buy flood there, but I'll buy it if I can insure the whole thing is one. Well, they're all connected by overhead walkways which are attached to each building, which makes a common roof line between them. Okay, so I can write 500 and 500. So I'm insuring the building at this location, and I'm including all the additions and extensions. That's one way. Or I can do them separately, okay? The one thing I don't like, it says excludes additions and
Right.
extensions, and you can't exclude them. They're either in or they're out. They're either being insured separately or they're being insured as one. And so we need to clarify that, to be honest with you, but that's a good suggestion. We'll make a note of that.
What you select, the rate doesn't change.
No, it won't change the rate. But the government wants to identify, for claims purposes and audit purposes, that are you insuring this as one building or two? And in that, so we're gonna have to present a separate policy. They're just getting the information up front. Correct. You could have a.
Oh, yeah, it's one of the questions on when you're doing a quote.
Well, think about it. I could have a residence, a primary residence with a cabana attached by a breezeway. Am I insuring this as one building or am I insuring this two? That's really the question. What is this policy doing? That's what it's trying to define. It just doesn't do, it needs to be clarified. Anything else?
Dwayne, Janet, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you very much.
Complicated topic, obviously, and we appreciate everyone's attention. We appreciate your coming. I hope, if nothing else, we demonstrated today that our team at Wright Flood really knows their stuff, and they're available to you as our customers. So, obviously contact Dwayne, contact Jana with questions, and again, thank you very much. If you would like a copy of the overheads, please see Justine, and she'll email them to you. And this will be on our website. So again, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.